JB Sauceda, welcome to Built to Sell Radio.
Hey, how's it going?
I'm good, man. Tell me a little bit about Sauceda Industries. You were in the logistics business, but you have a kind of an interesting backstory around the t-shirt business that got you into this. So explain that.
Yeah, it's always like an MC Escher painting trying to explain. I was in commercial advertising for like 10 years. I was a commercial photographer. One of my buddies' dads, like early in my career, made this joke to he and I that we were never going to get rich if we were only making money when we were working, basically, and saying, like a photography business isn't scalable, which it isn't. And so that had always like stuck in my head. And fast forward a handful of years, like I was doing great work. I used to shoot for Wired, New York Times. Like I worked with all the major kind of national publications, but it was still not a scalable business. And a handful of years in, a buddy of mine had started this Twitter account that was focused on like memes and just sort of general satire for men and women and whatever. And, I was kind of intrigued by it. So I started a similar account, but more specific to Texas, called Texas Humor. And same thing, just satire about brisket, tamales, and, George Strait. And so it blew up. This is like the era of Twitter kind of really becoming common in 2011. And suddenly had an audience with like 200,000 or 300,000 people. And I started a retail store around it, had some t-shirts that were kind of making jokes about this concept that Texans see the world through the lens of Texas. And so the like famous design was this shirt that if you imagine the United States, like the North American map, Texas is solid and the rest of the continental US spells out ain't Texas. So that like was this, novel idea to Texans, and it blew up. But very quickly, my wife and I, who were shipping them out of our garage, had to figure out how to do this scalably. So we moved it to an office, eventually to a warehouse, and then it was going really well. But retail is very much a boom and bust business. You've got a lot of sales, and you need everybody that you have in your warehouse one day, and the following week it's a little softer, and you're having to kind of send those people home. So I just had this idea, to like start offering the service of the shipping piece to other people. I didn't know anything about what a 3PL was. I didn't know anything about the
You said
space.
3PL. That's
3PL.
Third
party logistics.
Party logistics. My audience probably maybe have heard that acronym. I have not. But these are companies that effectively online stores will use to fulfill their orders. They're like warehouses. Correct. Where there's a box of large t-shirts and a box of medium t-shirts and a box of small t-shirts, and an order comes in, and the logistics company gets a notification saying, hey, put a medium-sized t-shirt in a box and ship it to this guy in Austin.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. And 3PLs have been around, and a lot, it's kind of a broad term that refers to trucking companies, to, there's a contract logistics, et cetera. But, around that era of 2012, 13 is when, D2C shipping, like all the digitally native brands, like Allbirds and all of those companies were really starting. So 3PL was shifting from being this thing that was like a legacy service that was used to do wholesale shipping and distribution to like one-to-one. You're holding for a brand and then you're shipping directly to the consumer. So that we kind of started right in that era. And, the company at the time was really it was this retail brand. But having come from the creative space, when it got out that I was no longer a photographer and I was now running this logistics company, when you think about like most early stage D2C brands, they're started by creatives. They're not started by logistics operators. So when they start running into these problems, they don't even know where to look. So me, a guy who had historically built his business, photography and, advertising very publicly, I just parlayed that into the same strategy that I was using for logistics, and was talking about having a warehouse and talking about, the branding and things that like most 3PLs didn't really talk about. So inevitably that caught the, eye of a lot of brands that were here in Austin. The sort of biggest one that we were known for working with was Howler Brothers. And
say that one more time, JB. I didn't get that.
Howler Brothers, HOWLER. They're a really great brand here in town. They're really, well known now, but their CMO was the former CMO at Yeti and Yeti Coolers.
Yeah.
And I had shot for them as a photographer several times. And so he caught through the woodwork, heard through the woodworks that I was doing this and was like, wait, JB Sauceda is running a logistics company? What? And so sparked a conversation. And then, I mean, it was really like a waterfall. I mean, once we got them and they took a chance on us, we got a bunch of other brands, and we were known for being kind of the anti 3PL because I'm a creative guy who was used to having beers, in the office on, Friday afternoons, and, music blaring in our studio. And so all of those things that were like traditional advertising cultural, things, we embedded into a 3PL, and that was not normal. And so it really just kind of exploded. And from when we founded in 2013, we were in 3,000 square feet. And by 2020, we were in 126,000, and we had 150 employees. And so it was a very weird but rapid growth trajectory that we bootstrapped all the way to the top. So it was a lot of fun and challenging at the same time.
I bet. I mean, it's so fascinating because my impression of like I use the term fulfillment houses, and it's probably because I'm 100 years old, but my impression is like these sort of very dirty warehouses in the middle of nowhere, and you go in and they're all dark and there's like dust everywhere. Like boxes are ripped open and like guys are smoking and trying to figure out where to buy it. And they're just shipping off crap to and they're making all kinds of mistakes. Like I'm like probably old school, which is maybe where a lot of, your success came, because all of a sudden this guy who's known for branding and had like customer experience kind of rocks up and says, no, this can be done better.
Yeah, you're not wrong. What's funny is that I've always said that the logistics industry is not the shipping industry. It's the exceptions management industry. And there are, 98% of the companies out there see themselves as the first. And we certainly see ourselves as the latter, or saw ourselves as the latter. And the reason that distinction is important is because you'll hire differently when you think about the thing, like in a game of inches, which is what that industry is. It's certainly like a commodity service. Everybody's racing to the bottom on price. Everybody's racing on scale. And in reality, a lot of these businesses, especially the early startups that we were working with that were doing between like 2 and 20 million in revenue, that group is just like, how do I get back to making really cool stuff? I'm tired of dealing with logistics. Nobody gets into the business of running a business because they love running a business. They have something they're selling, some service or problem they're solving. And everything else, the back of house stuff, is just annoying. And so this falls like very clearly into that corner. And so, for us, what we found again was that the people that we were talking to didn't even really understand the service that they were buying. They were just buying it because someone told them that they needed to. And so if they could partner with someone that they liked and they enjoyed talking to day in and day out, that was going to make the process of cutting a check for something you didn't even want to have to spend money on a little easier. And so, we were known for being able to take, our clients are coming to town and we take them out, do all kinds of, like go get margaritas, do dinners. It was real, like we put them through their paces, in terms of just like client servicing. But, I learned everything about that from having been in the ad world where, as a photographer, that's what I was known for. Was my sets were really fun. They were really efficient. And, we would bid against other photographers, but typically the agency would know who they wanted to work with. And as long as you could be in budget, they were going to pick you because you were the lead, kind of pick or preferred photographer. And the reason you'd become preferred was they liked you. It was just, if you're going to have to spend 8 hours stressed out in the sun doing some work that you didn't want to have to do on that day, it's more fun with people that you like,
Sure.
And so we just translated that over and said, why can't we just charge a little bit more, pay people really well, retain people, and then people will really like us, So we, unlike most every other 3PL, we didn't have time-bound contracts. It was, you could leave in 90 days. And almost every other 3PL under the sun was, you got to sign up for 2 or 3 years. This is your pricing. Here are the really strict rules, et cetera. And we designed the contract to be about as mutual as it could be, which was disarming for some people to kind of see something that wasn't heavily weighted in our favor. But we did it because we wanted to establish a relationship like that from the beginning.
Explain the business model. How did you guys make money? How did you bill for your services effectively?
Yeah. So the idea is that, on paper, in a purely academic, approach, anyone can do this themselves more cheaply, more inexpensively. You can hire someone and do it yourself and it will be cheaper. But the problem is the carrying cost of that labor during your soft seasons. And you can let go of those people or just use temps, but there's an inherent, training cost and productivity loss that you have as you turn those people over. So the 3PL model is one in which, we're incentivized to try to maintain that labor, teach those people the ins and outs of your business. And then you're just paying a unitized cost when we pick, pack, and ship your orders. So we're going to charge you for storage, a pallet cost or a bin cost for each of the SKUs that we're storing on your behalf. We'll charge you for the pick, pack, ship. We're going to charge you for the receiving costs as inventory is arriving at our facility. But ultimately, it's very much a nickel and dime business. But the difference is that you're not carrying all those people, or during peak season when your business doubles or triples in size for a matter of 30 days. You don't have to figure out how to stand up this recruitment funnel to hire all these people. We got really good at that. My wife was actually one of my business partners, and she leaned into the people operations side of that. And we were exceptional at recruiting people. I mean, that was a thing that we did better than anybody else. I have no doubt in my mind. And for years, we get calls from the other major 3PLs and competitors asking us, how are y'all doing this? How are you competing with Amazon? How are you competing with, the other companies that are paying more? And it was really, pretty simple. It was just, we were focused on the culture, which is kind of a fluffy word now, but distilling that down, it's employee engagement, retention. We had one-on-ones with associates, people who don't typically hear from managers. There were a lot of things. We did loan programs for, hourly workers that were trying to buy a car or, get a down payment for a house, things like that most companies just don't even consider. But, became a calling card of our business in a big way.
What was your wife's secret to recruiting some of these people? You mentioned the loan program and the management, but how did you attract people? Because I think a lot of people are saying, especially these kind of minimum wage, lower wage jobs, it's really hard these days to get people to do that work. So what other techniques did she try? What worked?
I think it's a mixture of things. When you treat job descriptions for those roles like a commodity, they read like a commodity. And, one of our core values was give a shit. And I don't know if I can curse on here. I guess
you just did.
But so we had core values that were pervasive, which again, at some companies and ad agencies, core values are like the thing. Your product is your people. And so every company under the sun says that, but how woven into your business are your core values really is a question that you have to ask. And in her case, she really took those and rolled them out across the organization in a really deep way. And so from a job description perspective, one of the things that she did was wrote them in a way that spoke to the people reading it, and so this give a shit value, it instead of saying associates working for Sauceda Industries will come into the warehouse and pick, pack, and ship. It was, we're looking for someone who gives a shit about their work, gets annoyed with coworkers who don't pull their weight, wants to level themselves up in a big way, and cares about being somewhere long enough that people remember their name. Right? Have you ever seen a job description that's written that way?
Nope.
No. But it speaks to the human part of you that says yeah, I remember being at a company where my assistant manager kept calling me Jamie instead of JB. Right? That makes me go whoa, for them to take the time and put that in the job description will stand out as, a thing. So that was such a subtle thing that she did that didn't, I was like, okay, whatever. She did it. And man, it was wild how many people came into the business and they were like, oh my God, that job listing just jumped out. I had to apply. It was crazy. People, this is 2013, 2014. People were falling all over themselves for these $12 and $13 an hour jobs. And they were like, wow, it spoke to me. I'm like, this is a calling, And one of the other things she did too was look at little nuanced things we were recruiting people through Indeed, but we weren't getting a ton of responses to some of the follow-ups. And she was like, I wonder if we just shift this to text message responses and follow-ups. And boom. It was we went from a 30% response rate to a 70. Because when you think about it, a lot of these folks who are deskless workers don't check their email all the time. They certainly do check their phone. And so, if you use the same kind of approach that you use for recruiting white collar, workers, you're not going to like have the same response. And so she just really, spent the same amount of energy on the psychographics of the people we were trying to recruit that we were spending on the marketing side of like, who is our ICP? Who is the ideal customer? Where do they spend their time? What are they reading? So that's just a thing that, I will say that I was very lucky to have at a business our size, because I think, a lot of small businesses under 100 people, if they're recruiting in or they have an HR representative, they're either using like a PEO, like an Insperity, or maybe they've got like a generalist who is really there for compliance and HR. And Priscilla, when I twisted her arm to join me at the company, she was like, I'm only coming on board if I can focus on this. And I mean, she did it in spades. But we both believe very firmly that any small business can do this. It's just about making the time to do it, which is, I know, difficult. But once you do it and you take the time, and you kind of do that like on your business work instead of in the business, and you ask yourself like, what are the goals here? Then it was like those learnings just played out over time. And it was like, boom, 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 boom. We were just out competing everybody else. So.
And what's the backstory on the name? Because, I gotta come clean. Sauceda is brutal to spell. I'm like, I saw it on my counter today. I'm like, JB, wow, saucy, like I can't. So now you've helped me with the phonetic spelling. So now I've got it, but it ain't easy. And then you name your company Sauceda Industries.
Yeah.
Not only can no one pronounce it, but they can't spell it. What happened? This is from a marketing guy.
Yep. No, so I actually, photographers don't build, like commercial photographers who are doing ad work. You don't name yourself like hot shot photography or something like that. Like you might do that if like you're shooting headshots or something like that. But really in the commercial world, the agency wants to know the person that they're hiring. It's very dog and pony in that way. And so when we started Texas Humor, I filed the LLC as Sauceda Industries as a joke because we weren't making anything. Like we were using a third-party company to print our T-shirts, and it was just sort of more than anything, it was kind of a nod to the blue-collar town that I grew up in. But like we didn't have a warehouse or anything like that, so I'm sitting on my couch like creating memes on a laptop.
Yeah.
But when we started the 3PL, again, like I didn't know what I was doing. This was my first business with like real employees, so I didn't go start a separate LLC. I just started doing this under an LLC I already had stood up. And then I actually debated at one point changing the name. There was a 3PL here in town that was going out of business that was going to kind of sell us their customer list for a kind of finder's fee. And they had a really great name, which was Fulfillery. And I loved that because a lot of the other 3PLs were like some, kind of play or pun on the word ship. And I didn't want to do that. I hated that. So I liked Fulfillery. It had motion and had some kind of energy to it. But when I took that to Ross, who was our other business partner and my wife, they were like, we're going to walk away from all this like kind of brand equity that we have that's wrapped around you. Like the first couple of big clients we've gotten were because they knew you. Let's ride that, And so we did. And that worked really well. I mean, it certainly was this, my word is strong as oak kind of thing that like as brands would come in and talk to us, they wanted to work with me. They kind of knew me. They felt like, all right, if he's running this thing, that's a really solid kind of vote of confidence for us, that he's going to be around. We can call him, which was awesome. But, wasn't great in the sense that telemarketers could figure out who they needed to call when they wanted to cold call. And, with time, the question of what happens if JB gets hit by a bus became a bigger concern. And so that, what worked really well for us to grow and like build a business and build in public and do all that became somewhat of a liability over time, that we had to kind of work through for sure.
Maybe walk me through that piece. Like, how did you know it was becoming a liability and what did you do to minimize the risk?
Well, I knew it was a liability because, there were some businesses that, I'll speak for myself and hopefully, the hair on none of our the listeners fall back or the back of the neck stands up. But, I describe like early to mid stage business, especially for first time CEOs like me. We all go through this like, do you know who I am? Itis, like this kind of, a little bit of like self-importance of like, I've got a business, there's like 15 of us and we're really like, how do you know, what do you mean you've never heard of me? Or, like that kind of stuff. And look, like you need a few of those punch in the guts to kind of create that humility that I think develops with the second and third time CEOs and leaders. And when you're on your way up and you've got nothing but wins, like you can get a little bit, high on the hog, as we say in Texas. And so, the challenge with running a business with your name attached to it is that even when you're trying desperately to like really create leverage and like, delegate and elevate people in your business for your clients to go to them to like really create solutions to problems, they still want to call you. They still want to text you. They still want to like go directly to you. And that was a challenge. Not only because like, I at a certain point, I didn't want to hear it. Like it was hard for me to think about the business in the long term when I was being pulled into the day to day. But I'm also just not wired to be that problem solver that you want. Like I'm a creative guy. Like I'm over here doing the dog and pony show, building the culture that is creating the product that you want to work with. And if you're calling me, like I'm going to lose my, I'm going to lose sort of interest, or not interest, but like I don't have the attention span and the tenacity to solve this like very specific thing in your business. And you hired our company for that. So I need you to go to them. I can convey the importance of solving this problem to our team, but like actually doing it won't happen through me. And that increasingly becomes a challenge, And so for me, as someone who had built multiple businesses, even Texas Humor, like was associated with me personally. It wasn't my name and people didn't really know that, but they knew my face. That was a little bit of a challenge that like, I had to really navigate in the latter half of building the company. And that came from, a lot of really tough conversations with our employees who were frustrated that I inject myself into problems, maybe frustrated that things weren't happening fast enough and I'd want to throw my weight around. And they're like, it's happening at the speed it should. And you're trying to kind of break the system. So like, go away. That helped a lot. I joined EO, which taught me that, to like ditch the self-importance and that, the name is valuable, but like the name should become a brand and not JB. Like it shouldn't continue to be me. So like let other people use the name in the way that they would, fulfillery or whatever else, like let that wrap around people and represent like what the values are, but it shouldn't be you. And that was huge. I mean, that was, something that really resonated with me. And as a storyteller and somebody who like really enjoys the narrative part of running a business and the internal comms part of the business, it was really freeing, and it gave me, a lot of opportunities to really interact with the business in a different way and use the platform that I built for myself to kind of like grow the company to then talk about our people more directly and specifically. And that really, I think, helped them feel great and like, seen and heard internally. And over time, I mean, it was really awesome to see the number of our clients who really, when they would hear or talk about Sauceda, it wasn't like, we love working with JB. It was like, oh my God, I can't imagine a life without Kasha or Cody or Logan or RJ. Like those people's names were more of it. And then it became like Sauce Fam or the Sauceda way. And so then it like transcended me in this really awesome way, but it took deliberate work. And
how did you do that? Because I think a lot of our listeners, maybe their surnames are in their company name or just at least they are synonymous with the service they provide. And, their customers want them personally to take care of their account. And it sounds like you were able to codify and start to delineate between JB Sauceda, the person, and Sauceda, the brand. I'd be curious to know what you did to transfer JB, the person, into a brand.
I think that, historically, I'm like a very ADD, run to the problem, run to the idea person, like 30 seconds before we were jumping on here, I had an idea for a LinkedIn post I was hammering out. So like, frameworks are my friend, and they really help give me structure to wrap the ideas around. And we were lucky around 2017 to stumble upon EOS. There are a million of these systems out there, but EOS, for anyone listening, is a great framework. It's a lot like Scaling Up or Rockefeller Habits and the other kind of systems for running your company. But the gist of it, like EOS is kind of the less important detail. What's more important is that it taught us to really think about things like our core values, our mission statement, how we did performance management, how we communicated internally at the company, and all of that stuff collectively. And so for each of us, my wife on the people side, for me, kind of operationally and from a marketing perspective, and for Ross, operationally, it gave us a way to kind of think about how to package the business, and I still have here, I'm literally sitting here. I'm not even running a company today, but like I have the EOS like kind of process, their little like, multi-step, this is how we work with you, and for them, it's like how EOS works with us. So for us, we sat down and thought about that. Like, what does it mean to be an employee at Sauceda Industries? Like, what does it mean to get hired here, to get retained, to be exited if it's not the right fit? What does that mean for customers? Like, what is the process and what are the specifics that will make you a great fit or not? And all of that packaged together over time, gave us a framework that allowed everybody to know that we were on the same page and they could grab it and run with it. And so what took place was that as we shifted from this like top-down cultural approach to one where our values were embedded into our performance management and into our job descriptions and into like Slack emojis. And, when somebody would do something above and beyond for a client, like it wasn't a good job. It was, oh my God, they were giving a shit, or they were exploring more. They were saying yes. And like that stuff, really subtle, right? It's a coat of paint over just like basic human behavior. That stuff became unique to us. And so it wasn't just what every company would say, which is like going above and beyond. It was saying yes and, which was a core value. And like these subtle little things had a coat of that like brand paint on them that everybody could take. And then everybody felt like they knew it when they saw it, right? It's like the old obscenity Supreme Court quote, I can't
describe pornography, but I know it when I see it.
I know it when I see it,
Yeah,
right? And
yeah.
so that in a way is like when you've arrived, and a system like a framework really helps you get there. And so my suggestion to people is really pick a system. Don't keep trying to reinvent the wheel. A lot of these things are really basic, like performance management in particular. It doesn't really have to be more complicated than here are our core values, each one. Are you below, at, or above exceeding each of these values? And that can be a specific measurable thing. And when you give people a sense of like what it means to be in or outside of the values, they start to operate, they kind of like interpret what you would want as a leader and what you would want as a C-suite. And they start to do these things on their own. And like, I would tell people all the time that my favorite experiences in running the company were in the latter half, when suddenly like the company and the people there would just like do stuff I had no idea was being worked on. And I'd go like, oh my God, I never thought of that, and that's really, I think that the sort of arrival moment for any leader is when you can like trust enough and create enough trust in your company that people do things that you're like really excited about and you had no idea or no part in, that's, I think that kind of like process.
That's super helpful. How did you deal with employees who let customers down, given that your name was on the door? I think a lot of founders struggle when their surname is in the company name, and a customer's disappointed. They have a bad experience for whatever reason. Employee has a bad day or whatever, and they fall short of expectations. And it's all of a sudden no longer just the company letting a customer down. It's like you personally, JB, your name is on the door and you've let them down. There's a personal, how did you overcome that? Because with 150 employees, shit happens, right?
Happens.
It's not always perfect.
Yeah. That never went away.
Do you know what I'm asking though? Like, first of all, like, do you know?
No, I know. No, I think the best example I can give of what was a real turning point for me as like a leader in like, you have to understand that that's going to happen, right? Like you don't get the good without the bad. And so like that, I eventually figured out, and that was true even as a photographer. But I think where the thing that really taught me how to like shift from playing whack-a-mole in those scenarios to like strategic chess with a business was this article that I think it was like an example in HBR in the Harvard Business Review or one of these sort of like management periodicals. And it said, if you want your kid to stop using their cell phone at the dinner table, go to the why so they understand what you value. Don't go to the policy. So if your kid's using the cell phone at the dinner table and you just take the cell phone away, they still want the cell phone. And all they think about is the fact that you asked them to take it away. But if instead over time you teach them that the reason that we don't use cell phones at the table is because we value spending time with one another, that like makes the cell phone less cool in a way, right? I mean, with teenagers or kids, you still got to work it out over time. But there's a difference between sort of strategy and policy. Policy is black and white, what you do and don't do. Strategy is like a guiding principle that helps you figure out what to do or not to do in each instance in which it something comes up. And so that was really, I think, when I became okay with these issues playing out, because, things would happen and they were bad. And I'd jump into them in the early stage of our business. And then it was like, hey guys, I took care of it. Yeah, I don't know what was going on with them, but it was exhausting. But where I could certainly spend my time was that over time, as the business got bigger, we had more and more clients. We were doing 130,000 packages a month. Stuff goes wrong. It's exceptions management industry. What I could certainly jump in and help with was like when really bad things happened, then I could step in and say, look, like here's what led to this situation. And, our customers would understand it. And if they didn't, and they were really over the top and they were just like, I still need my pound of flesh for me to feel better about the situation. It was a sign to me that like that customer just wasn't the right fit, and it wasn't like a flip the table over, like, if you can't forgive me, get the hell out of here. That's not what we were working towards. But if like working together with us in a professional relationship meant that there was just, you always needed to like create pain for us, that's against our values too. And so ultimately the right clients stuck with us, and they'd be frustrated. They'd call us, but we could like talk it off the ledge, and both of us would be like, oh yeah, the client would typically say like, here's what we did to contribute to the problem too, but it was because there was such strong cultural alignment.
Did you ever have situations where people, like a customer would say, like, I demand to talk to JB?
Yeah, that happened all the time. Yeah, I mean, and I'd have those conversations, but 9 times out of 10, I'd also ask, like, how have we arrived here? Have we? I have like a really simple framework I use for myself, which is like self, system, person. And so our account servicing team was known for, starting with self. Like, if a customer is losing their mind, let's not just call them crazy. Let's ask, like, what did we do to create this situation? And sometimes we'd have reasons that they might be pissed off at us, and sometimes we're like, I think we did everything right here, and the system's working the way it should. They are just really tough. But it was a self-aware approach to account management. And sometimes I would just refuse, and I'd say, hey, look, like, I don't think we've done enough here, or I don't think that they're being reasonable, and they need to work it out through y'all. But yeah, I mean, I take it on the chin. I got really good at getting punched in the face. But that's logistics, and that's kind of what you sign up for when you get into that industry. But again, it was why from the very beginning, we got so much better at filtering out. We weren't perfect at this. Early on, we took on a lot of bad clients, but like over time, who we didn't work with was more important than who we did, because then it meant that we were working on this like foundation of trust, right? Like, I'm a big believer in Patrick Lencioni's 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, that book. And, his whole concept is that, like, if you don't have trust, you don't have accountability, you don't, like everything else that kind of falls as a result. And so if I can't work with a client that trusts me, then I shouldn't work with them. And so as we got better at that, we got better at finding employees who are our clients trusted. And over time, most of our clients didn't even really want to hear from me, because they were like, yeah, whatever, like, he's here and he's just going to tell them what to do anyway. Let's just work it out with them, which was like, that was great. It didn't mean that I didn't still get the tough emails. I mean, 2020, that was a stressful time for all of our clients. And there were some tough emails that I got from people on the daily during some periods of that. But I shifted into being politician more than I had to be like the operator, and I had to, shake hands and kiss babies just as much as get out in the warehouse and ship orders sometimes.
So walk me through where you got with this business. You mentioned you got to 150 employees by 2020, 126,000 square foot facility. Ballpark kind of revenue. Are you able to share revenue or not?
Yeah. When we sold the company, we were on track to do about 14 million in top line. 2020 was a huge boon. I mean, we basically doubled in size in the latter couple of years. Every year, we went from 4.5 to roughly 8, and then 2020 we started not slowed down, but I mean, like doubling in size as 3PL is really tough, but we went from like a 10,000 square foot warehouse at around 2018 to 20,000, and then right around 2019 moved into a 60,000, and then 2020 like drove us into 125,000. So it was just boom, 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 boom. But yeah, around 14 million in revenue. And, one of the biggest things that really drove that growth was we launched the Shopify Fulfillment Network, which has been in the news here this year because they spun it off to Flexport. And but when that program started, it was intended to be sort of a mom and pop network of 3PLs. And so for a handful of reasons, cultural reasons specifically, we were selected to be the 3PL to launch that. And so we launched that in private or confidentially in 2018, and then publicly in 2019. And then it blew up in 2020. So that was a crazy trajectory to go from, effectively 10,000 square feet to 126 in about 2.5, 3 years.
What made you decide to sell?
2020, to be honest. It was a lot. Like I kind of got to a point where, operationally, I felt like I was getting ahead of my skis. Like I didn't really have all of the skills that I felt like I needed to take the business and double it again. It was growing at a pace that I was able to keep it together. But we were growing a low margin business in a capital intensive industry. And for us to really start keep the pace and keep up with where the industry was going, I felt like I either needed to raise money or sell to a strategic, acquirer. So in 2021, I just told my wife, I said, look, there are more zeros behind every question or problem that comes up now, which is scarier. And we've got a really great team. I'd assembled a really great leadership team, but our business partner, Ross, had just left the company in late August 2020 and was going to go do something else. And, I was just kind of ready for a change and felt like I can keep managing this business, but I don't know that I have the energy or the kind of experience to really keep it going at the pace that it needs to, unless I did some of what I just described. And so we started kicking the tires on raising a little bit of money. We had some friends and family and a private equity firm in Houston that I knew one of the principals at, who, was always really interested in being involved with us. And so I think if we really had the desire to do it, I could have, raised a few $1,000,000 pretty easily, given our track record where we were going, and really gone there. But we had a lot of private equity reaching out to us. 2020 was big for logistics. Valuations were at a peak. And so private equity was calling us quite a bit. Profitably, we weren't really where private equity needed us for the size of business. And so it didn't
what does that mean?
Well, a lot of private equity firms that were calling us at that stage were looking to do, platform roll-ups, and putting together a few 3PLs. And so to go through that exercise, they typically need a certain amount of cash flow to support the debt that they would put on the business to go through the acquisition. And, we were doing pretty well, but we were effectively a break-even business, the last year or so, as we were investing in we were running 2 warehouses still, moving out of our old one into the new one, buying a ton of racking, hiring people to manage all that. So from a private equity firm perspective, it really needed another year to get through all of the growth, stabilize financially, and then it could make sense. And so we tabled the private equity. We didn't count it out, but we just said, that's not going to be a target for us. But if the right strategic comes along, they can probably see it. And if that happens, great. And so around that time, two groups that I had met during 2020, just through like Zoom, came along. And the first one was a great organization. We really loved what they were doing brand wise. They were trying to build something similar to us. It was a little bit more, it wasn't purely 3PL, but our services were going to, augment what they were doing. And so we looked at that deal, but with the way our cap table was set up, with our partner having left the business and a few other kind of reasons, it just wasn't, I never really like considered it seriously. We just looked at it at a really high level, and we just said, look, the deal structure won't make sense for us as three partners. So we passed on that and just said, maybe not now, but maybe later. But then Cart.com came along. I had met the CEO in 2020 on a panel that we had done about the future of e-commerce. He was still at what was it, Blinds.com, which was part of Home Depot. And he was kind of intrigued by what we were doing in the logistics space. And we just kind of chit chatted on this call. And then we reconnected that spring. The private equity partner that I knew and the head of Capital Factory, which is a VC here in town, heard him talking about the need for Cart.com to buy a 3PL. And they were like, why don't you call JB? And he was like, wait, the guy in Austin? And he was like, I know that guy. And so like literally all three of those people texted me that night, and the two finance guys were like, this guy wants to buy your company. And that guy, Omer, was like, hey, are you interested in selling a 3PL? And we talked, and it was just like a boom, boom, boom. Like next thing I knew, we were under LOI and selling the business. So wow. It was really, really rapid.
It's amazing what comes out of being on a panel.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's why I think that like doing stuff like this is so important. It's not really a self-promotion thing. It's just, like let people know you exist. Everybody's got something interesting to say.
So what, fill in a little bit of the backstory there. So you have the conversation, you have this initial conversation. Who raises the specter of acquisition? Does the Cart.com guy says, hey, we're looking to buy a company like yours. Are you interested?
Yeah. It basically, it basically started with them realizing strategically that they could get into the kind of 3PL segment a little faster to acquire rather than build. They had done some really fantastic work standing up a network and getting some of those pieces together. But a lot of 3PL struggle. They typically start out of like a specific need that they're solving, which then gives them some level of specialization that they can build around. If you just sort of open your doors as a 3PL, you get a lot of disparate calls to ship large, small, whatever. It gets really tough to scale that. So that was a realization that they came to very quickly. And so ultimately, that's why they said, for what we're trying to do with our kind of more holistic business, this end-to-end e-commerce strategy, we should just buy someone who's already gone through the 10 years of like battle scar building, work.
100%. So how does the specter of money come up? Like, do they say, like, do they ask, what's your revenue? What's your profitability? Like how did that all kind of come together?
Yeah. So the reason we, initially we had an idea for what we thought the partners all kind of wanted to see.
The partners being Ross,
me, Priscilla, and Ross.
Yeah.
And we had a sense for like what we were looking for at a high level, because before our partner had left the business, we had discussed a buyout. So we had gone through a valuation, and I had worked with an accounting firm that did partnership buyout valuations, which are done differently. And so, if you've never done a valuation, there are like, kind of the easiest way to contrast is like there's a strategic valuation, which is arguing that, this is worth something. This asset is worth something to somebody outside for strategic purposes and arguably should be worth more. And then a partnership buyout is typically looked at as a mixture of asset and kind of future potential revenues or profits. And, there are a lot of things to consider there, like what are the risks of continuing to run the business? What is the equity structure, right? Like arguably 49% of equity is worth a lot less than 51 because you control nothing, despite it being so similar
Mm-hmm.
or close in amount.
And with Ross, did you guys have were you all third, or did you?
Roughly, yeah. I had I didn't have a controlling stake. I had 50%, and then Ross had around 30%, and then my wife had about 20.
Okay.
And so collectively, her and I had 70, but he had 30. He had come on. She had started the business with me, and then he joined about a year and some change in as kind of a consultant, and then a full-time employee. And then we issued some equity in exchange for him sticking around and helping us kind of build in the early years.
And how did you value, what technique did you use? Was it a multiple, how did you value the business when Ross decided to leave? Was it what multiple of EBITDA or multiple of revenue?
I forget what the specifics were, but it was effectively they looked at everything from cash to, actual just assets on the balance sheet, revenue, et cetera. And then they basically said, based off of the current revenue, we think it wasn't EBITDA. It was just a revenue only. They said the business is worth X. And as a result, if you just divide by the equity, it is worth Y. And so, 30% of what the valuation was that the accounting firm came up with. But then they also said, because it's a minority share, I forget what they called it, but it was a minority discount or minority partner discount. I think it was the term. They said this is actually technically worth 25% less than that, right? So if it was $1 million, then it was worth $750 instead. And so, which was not worth $1 million, but that was kind of the thinking there. And the argument is that in the event that he were to try to sell it to somebody else, it is going to be a less marketable asset because whoever comes in will also take no controlling stake in the business. And so, so they're kind of just along for the ride of whatever I and potentially Priscilla agreed to do, operationally. So that, that's a thing that I think a lot of people don't always consider. I had a lot of discussions with, in my forum with people who had businesses who had gone through similar experiences. So I had that kind of in the back of my mind. But that's something that, definitely comes up. And the company that did the valuation, they did both things. I mean, they were like, what are all the really great ideas you have? That's worth something, on paper, it's worth where are you going, where the partnerships on, and we have a responsibility to share all that, but equally so, they have to consider all of the risks to buying any amount of the equity. And that was an aspect of it. So, now that valuation was sort of a baseline for us to use for talking to Cart.
Mm-hmm.
We used it to kind of give a floor of what we thought that it was. But again, that, when I went to them and talked about that, I didn't go and say, this is what we've been valued at. I had that in my back pocket as ammo as we talked through what we thought the business is worth strategically. And at the time, the industry was transacting typically at around 3 to 5x EBITDA. And you could see it being a little bit higher than what most businesses were, if you were much larger. But if you were under about a $30 or $40 million, 3PL, you were transacting at about 3 to 5 X EBITDA right in that period.
And in your case, you were cash flow positive or cash flow break even. So did you do a normalized EBITDA saying, if we weren't growing and reinvesting, this is what our EBITDA would have been?
Yeah. So we did an adjusted EBITDA. We looked back at the trailing 12 and said, okay, what are the things that we can add back? If we weren't managing 2 warehouses, this is a cost that we wouldn't have. If we weren't, carrying the extra labor to manage the move, this would be added back, et cetera. And we landed at, a normalized EBITDA that was within industry standard for kind of what you would expect a business to be doing. We also accounted for things we knew that our Shopify contract wasn't great. And so if we walked away from it, our revenue would come down, but our profitability would go up. Or if we normalized and renegotiated that contract, then we could get, our EBITDA to X, and that would so it created a band that said, okay, our business is this size. The industry typically profits between 7 and 10% to the bottom line, kind of just middle of the road. And can we normalize to that and feel good about it? Or is that a bridge too far?
Mhm.
And so we normalized to something in that range. And then we said, all right, well, where do we feel comfortable about that? And we all took things into consideration. I mean, Cart took things like our debt and, the stuff that we had to get through in terms of the move and all of that, and maybe some labor costs into account. And we took our ability to move quickly into account. I think one of the things that a lot of people discount when they're building their business is how important it is to have clean books and really, really clean compliance around HR and people. And I had never sold my business before. And although my attorney had done a ton of M&A, he was a really close friend and knew, how to run all this stuff. One of the things that he really stressed to us, and when I asked, Omer, the CEO at Cart, I was like, what's going to scuttle this deal? We were in love and we want to do this deal. We felt really confident before we got to an LOI, what we needed to do. And I asked him, what will scuttle this? Because I've never sold a company before. And he said, skeletons in the closet. It's I don't know what they are. These are typically what will stress me out. People, risks, tax, stuff that's you don't just get around, that's what's going to scare me. And that was a huge relief for me because we had spent so much time early on investing in a really good accounting firm. Our people compliance was really good. Just because my wife ran people didn't mean she let me off easy. It was good. And so when we got into due diligence, once we got the LOI nailed down, once we got to due diligence, it was wow, it's really easy to find everything that you need. And that just evokes confidence that you're buying a good asset. And that really sped the process up. And for us, it provided a lot of conviction that the company was worth, more than what the EBITDA was indicating at the time. Not to mention that our client list was stellar. I mean, I think every 3PL that we talked to in those days was wow, how the hell did you guys get all these clients? Between Shopify, Tecovas, Bill Murray was a client. He came to our warehouse. We just had this aura around us that was worth something that was additional.
You mentioned debt. How was the debt handled?
So we arrived at a general sort of enterprise value that accounted for some debt. And you'll have in an acquisition what's called a networking capital adjustment that will take place basically through the process. You'll go through due diligence. And through the diligence, you'll also typically on the front end of that process. So for us, it was, Omer reached out to us. I got a text message in late May. We spent a lot of time on the phone for a couple of weeks and calling, talking about where our views were about the business, the industry, et cetera. They came and visited us, et cetera. And then in early June, we were all right, this feels good. Let's get to an LOI. We spent a lot of time on the LOI. And that was through the suggestion of our attorney, which he said, look, you're going to, both of you are going to uncover a lot of stuff through due diligence. So work out the deal structure as early as you can. Just get to the high level stuff, title, comp, earnouts, all of the minutia, everything that you think you'll get hung up about personally, do it now. And if y'all are 1,000 feet apart on this, then the deal's going to fall apart when you get to the finish line. So just do this now. So we spent a lot of time on that. And then as soon as we were done with that, we worked out little things if the deal goes through, they're going to pay us, X for our legal fees that we're going to incur. They're going to cover this. They're going to cover that. This was going to be my title at the company, et cetera. So everybody was really happy. We're great. Sent the LOI over, got Ross's buy-in, got Priscilla's buy-in, signed it, had an emotional moment. And then it was okay, now the real work starts. So the next day, a woman came in to do quality of earnings. So she did forensics on our accounting, make sure that what we're saying is our revenue is real. And so that was a big process. Took about a week and a half. And then due diligence was 30 days, which was crazy for a deal of our size. But basically in the quality of earnings, what they do is an analysis on not only what do your books look like and are they real? But then just what do we think arguably the business should have in terms of cash at close, right? You sell the business. We think that it needs to have $250,000 or $1 million in the bank. And if we're going to pay you, call it, $5 or $10 million, how much of that should come out of our pocket versus yours? And so if we agree that we're going to pay you, $5 or $10 million for this business, and that's what we're willing to pay as the acquirer, then how much of that does not go to you, but instead goes to shoring up the business or, the other way around, maybe there's more money that we give you because there's more cash in the business, et cetera. Right. So that net working capital adjustment is like an important number that like matters a lot in a deal. And so in our case, we had debt that was a mixture of like the credit cards that we used for paying off our, the postage every month. And it was just a rotating line. And then we had like, debt that we had taken on to manage the move and some things like that. And so we said, we would like, my wife, Ross, and I kind of backed into a number. We said like, we want to see this much cash up front. We're willing to roll, those of us that were going to move on with the business, we're willing to roll some equity. And that number kind of came in a little low, given that they wanted us to come with the business, Priscilla and I. So we basically said, we want to see this much cash to the partners. We'd like to see this much rolled equity and this much of an earnout if we have to come and work there for any amount of time. And then there's debt. And so they kind of looked at all those numbers together and they said, all right, the debt wipes out this much. And then this much is what we have to play with and kind of figure out, effectively where all that goes. And so we found if we just walked away from the business, they felt like the company was worth this much. And so that was like effectively what the cash was. And then they said, if you come along, you and Priscilla come along and help us grow the business and hit some specific objectives, then we'll give you this much equity for being here for longer. And then if you hit these financial targets, they were like goals, I had to grow the business, then we'll give you this additional cash. And so for them, it de-risked it. And so as a total kind of enterprise value, it was one round number, but like a portion of it was technically at risk, based off of whether or not I could, get the ball across the finish line, so to speak, with like growth, et cetera. So.
Got it. That's helpful. So it was a kind of 4-part structure. I know your time is precious. Do you have time for a quick lightning round before I let you go?
Yeah. I've got a little bit more time. Yeah.
Cool. Slimiest, most questionable trick an acquirer tried to play on you in the process of either raising investment, talking to outside investors, acquirers?
I wouldn't say that I really had any tricks that played out. But I think that I've heard stories from people about, and this is why the LOI matters, of like retrades that kind of happen at the goal line. And so the LOI, although like 99% of the time is non-binding, matters because it's just like this emotional document you can go back to and say like, I thought we were on the same page. What I've found people run into, and like as I've talked to other founders who sold, the biggest issue, like earnouts are a thing that a lot of people sign up for, and it feels really great, and everybody's in love when you close the deal. But they're probably the number one tripwire that I hear other founders kind of like running into, and then like not getting their full value, right? Like I sold my business for 10 million, $1 million was cash up front, and 9 was an earnout. And then like I'll ask like, well, what was your earnout structure? And they'll say I had to hit an EBITDA number. But then there's a clause in the contract that says the acquirer can run the business however they like, which means you can get sidelined. They saddle this thing up and move a bunch of stuff from one column to the other. And now the EBITDA is wiped out. They never owe you an additional dime. Like that, I hear about that all the time. That did not happen to me. Like we were in a very, I had a really great attorney who looked at some of those things. And so there were parts of our employment agreement that had the earnout in it that said like, we can run the business however we like. And we said, great, that's awesome. But if we agree that like this earnout is kind of meant to sort of compensate me for being here, how can we protect that? And like before you get into the nitty gritty of what you uncover, et cetera, it's great to work that stuff out. And again, we had a really agreeable like acquisition. It was a great LOI kind of process, and Amer was fantastic and really agreeable to a lot of those considerations for us, that were very emotional for us as the sellers. But like, this is something I hear a lot of people run into. And so it's really like the slime isn't intentional. But like things can feel slimy to both parties is maybe the better way to say that. And so if the acquirers, they get to the finish line, they're like, wait, what is this thing that like you didn't tell us about, or like they wait till close. And then the acquirer is like, oh yeah, by the way, like I forgot about this like tax problem that I didn't mention, and like I figured out a way to like not rep and warranty, so that's it's like everybody hates being sold a bad bill of goods. And so, but everybody's also like in a rush to close a deal and get the cash. And so I just think that the more that you can kind of take the time and just be honest, the better. And being honest, the ability to be honest is predicated on you just like having your shit together ahead of time. So I had a guy basically say like, run a really healthy, clean business, because best case scenario, you get to sell and value a really healthy, clean business. In worst case, you run a really healthy and clean business, so that just was our mindset going into it that helped prevent that.
Yeah. We had Jay Steinfeld, the guy from blinds.com on the show years ago now. And he said, like run it like it's public, because you'll be thrilled that you did.
So Omer actually worked for Jay, and Jay's a great guy. Awesome guy. And I've met him, once or twice.
Have you?
I love that guy. It's great. Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah.
He's a great inspiration for sure. What did you guys tie your earnout to? Was it revenue?
There were some kind of revenue targets specifically around like the business that we were running. And so, it put me in a really great position where we could think, like really big and say, hey, maybe it's not just like our building, it's the whole thing. I like building in public, and I like, bringing in, clients. And so over time, Cart had a really great, like leaned in a really, great way into fulfillment, and saw it as an opportunity to really enter into deeper relationships and conversations with customers. And so for me, that was awesome. And their like kind of buy-in and fulfillment was, made it really easy, to like do well with my agreement and stuff. But yeah, I've heard everything under the sun. I've heard like, some companies doing like, revenue. I've heard EBITDA, I've heard customer count. I've heard you just have to be here. And so there are a lot of ways to kind of dice it, but, we had an attorney who had just seen a lot. And so he was able to really, Cart was never trying to put anything over on us, which was like apparent as we went through the process. Like anything we asked for, they were pretty typically like, we just get on like an issues call and say, here's how this makes me feel. What was your intent with it? And then you go, what was this? And we'd say, well, can we just like change this slightly? And they go, yeah, no big deal. Great. Like we're trying to protect our interests. You're trying to protect yours. Let's just find a win-win situation. And that's something I was really thankful for in the process.
What was the biggest mistake you made personally in selling your company?
I think, I didn't really, I don't call it a mistake per se, but I think, mentally a lot of founders, that I've spoken with, and certainly myself, like you don't really think a lot about like, what does life afterwards feel like for you, and where can you be most effective? There's a guy that I follow on Twitter that has made this comment that it's actually better for everybody if the founder just leaves right away. And, I wouldn't call it a mistake, because I learned a ton. The team there was fantastic. We recruited some really incredible people at Cart, and I learned a lot about go-to-market and a lot of other things that I just really didn't have to do at my company, and taught me about like future stuff that I want to work on. But I think, it's tough mentally as a founder to like join a business. And, I describe it as being like a former president the day after. Like you still get your CIA briefings, but nobody really gives a shit what you think. and I say that like to be playful, but like, I had a big seat at the table, and, I talked to Omer a lot. I ran communications for the company, and, I got to fly around and do a lot of work with the fulfillment company. So I had a seat at the table, but you lose agency, and depending upon your like, the acquirer that you work with, like you may or may not have that seat at the table. And so, for me, it was less about like I regretted selling, or regretted anything, or felt like I made a mistake, and more about like the mental shift was just something that was important. And Omer was always really great. Like if I'd call him and just say, hey, this doesn't feel like it's working, or like, hey, I remember with fulfillment, like as it was really growing, I was like, I don't think I'm the guy for you to run operations. Like we bought this other 3PL. I think there's a way for them to be really successful with what we're doing. How else can I help in the company? Like that was a good mental shift. And he was like, yeah, great. Like, let's go put you over here. Let's get you running comms, doing the stuff that you were loving at your company. And so I think like the biggest mistake was maybe like waiting too long to ask for those things. But again, I think just it's true whether you get sold or you buy it, you get bought out or whatever. Like open communication is just important. And I think that was something that I learned in a really big way. And, I used to tell my employees that all the time, like, why aren't y'all speaking up more? Like, use the channels. And somehow it like was lost on me, but I'd never been an employee before. So that was a navigation that I had to
What did they
figure
do
out.
with the Sauceda name?
They kept it for a while. Cart acquired like 9 companies. It was crazy. I mean, we were like, as a comms guy, it was a lot of fun because we had like a press release about an acquisition. Like it felt like every other day. It was awesome. And for a while to like really like lean into the brand equity, it was like Sauceda by Cart.com or, AmeriCommerce by Cart.com. But over time, like they kind of get folded into the network. We kept the core values posters. We have them hanging up in our house. My wife, like we'd never actually put posters up. So like maybe a month before we sold, she had some designed and like printed, and they were like up in the warehouse for a little while before the acquisition like closed. And so we got to keep those as like a memento. But yeah, they kept a lot of there were little practices. Like we used to hire mariachis to come into the warehouse like right before peak season, and they would do some of those things. And then like there was like a shout out channel that we had that was like a really big part of our culture on Slack. And we made our deskless workers use Slack a lot, and they got really involved with it. And so that became like woven into the Cart culture. My wife actually became one of the heads of culture and people strategy under the chief people officer at Cart. And so a lot of the cultural practices that we had at our company, Omer asked, he was like, make the Sauceda way like our way, like how do we like take those things and scale them up and do them across the business? And so that was a fun thing to see kind of live on, like the DNA. The name was sort of irrelevant. It was like finally the name's off the wall, but yeah, the website's down and all that kind of stuff is gone.
And what's your reaction to that? I'm curious. Like, I can see on one hand it might be great. My name's not on the door. I'm not going to get calls from any customers anymore. But also, I imagine there's maybe some sense of loss that you feel for. Like,
yeah.
Put words in your mouth. You tell me.
No. That's absolutely true. I mean, it's emotional to watch a company that you built, like, despite all of the wins, right? Like we are in a better position than we were before we sold it financially. Our people are paid a lot more, like Cart was so great, when we were going through that acquisition at the very beginning. I remember we had stuff that we had to do just because we were about to become part of a larger company. And we, Saheb, who was leading the deal on their side, and I like talked through a lot of the people stuff. And like there were policies we had to implement that were like not going to be everyone's favorite, but they're just part of like growing up, And we like Priscilla and I owned those, and we said like a month before we closed, like these are changes we have to make. And people were like, bummer, whatever. But they got over it. But then all the great stuff like pay raises and 401k, like we had a guy fall out of his chair, like he was doing it on purpose, but like we didn't have 401k at our company. And so there were like aspects of it that were really awesome to see, within the construct of Cart, our business had more people plucked kind of from within the business and get sort of hired into other, white collar roles elsewhere in support or sales or whatever. And that was a really gratifying feeling for us to see that and know that we'd hired really great people. That emotionally was awesome. But like with any business, I mean, much like some of our clients had historically, our people would come to me and be like, hey, we're having this challenge. Can you help with this or that? And I didn't always have all the agency to go solve those problems anymore. I had to say like, you have to trust the process, trust the system, and so that wasn't tough. I mean, I could call anybody and say like, hey, Saheb, hey, so-and-so, can you look into this? And they would. So there was a lot of collaboration there. But that changed. And so emotionally, it was tough to like see people that you've been working with for 8 years, 7 years, off doing their own thing, but I take a lot of pride now in seeing those people, again, excelling in a business. They have a career trajectory and opportunity that they would have never had under our business, or maybe it would have taken a lot longer under our business alone that they had at Cart. But, even outside of that, I mean, a bunch of people that used to work for me are now at another 3PL in South Austin that one guy who had left before we sold the company has now recruited some people. And he's got like a little mini version of Sauceda. They're doing some really great stuff there in their own way. And they've, taken some of what they learned from Priscilla and our company, and like, they're doing that there. It's awesome. It gets me choked up, and so seeing that, especially for a lot of people, like I flunked out of college. So to seeing a lot of these people who started literally for us cutting cardboard boxes for $12 an hour, running a 3PL, that is worth any and all of the kind of anguish of like, what do I do with myself? Like, who gives a shit? You'll figure it out, so I don't know. It's, I'm not trying to be altruistic, but there's like an altruistic aspect of like selling a company that feels really damn good, if you can do it the right way.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, you're a bottleneck for some employees to get to their next thing if you stay too long, for sure. It's interesting.
Yeah.
As you prepared your exit, for your exit, what resources? It sounds like you leaned heavily on your EO chapter. You mentioned a guy on Twitter you follow. Can you share his or her name?
There are a few. One of the biggest ones that I really like is Michael Girdley. He's a great follow as he really describes himself as like, I'm a leader, not a manager. And he's got this kind of great insight on writing a like how to work with me document that gives you a sense of like who he is as a CEO. And he's kind of shifted into being this like holding company leader as opposed to being the guy, he's like a 0 to 1 guy. And then he's like, I'm going to screw this up, got to get out of it. And then he shifts into these other kind of like roles.
Yeah, we'll put him in the show notes for sure. Anyone else that you leaned on for advice? Anything else you can point our listeners to that would
Kurt Schneiber, who is in Houston. He's an EOS implementer. I call him like my business dad. We haven't worked with him as an EOS implementer in 2.5, 3 years. And I still call him all the time. I'm going to have a meeting with him tomorrow.
Oh, that's so funny.
For one of the companies that I consult with right now. And and so Kurt Schneiber is, he's one of many EOS implementers, but I think that his sort of selflessness and approach to like service of others is just so great. I would say actually of all things that really like clicked for me, Patty McCord's Powerful book is like my culture Bible. She's known for writing the Netflix culture deck, which is, is like today, 20 years later is like, is it really the right way to build a business culture, et cetera? Like there's sure an argument to be made about that, but the mindset with which that they had that went into writing that, and then the way that the Netflix story kind of played out, and her self-awareness about how it affected her and eventually got her fired, frankly, was really like, transformational for me.
Wow.
To just read about how to like do like turning culture into small ball. Instead of thinking it's like these big motions and really expensive, it's like there's some really basic things about how you talk to people and how you in basic practices you can do that really like get you unstuck as a leader. And so that book I just love.
What did you and Priscilla buy yourselves collectively to commemorate the win? What was your trophy?
What was our trophy? Well, for one, you can't really see it, but after years of working together, like on our couch, we built an office in our backyard. So, and it's like maybe a lame thing to go spend some of your money on. And it wasn't like really that expensive, but that was one thing we were like, we love work. We love working together, but get it the hell out of our house and like off of the couch. And so that was one thing. We didn't really have any crazy expenses. What was funny is like we renovated our house and everybody thought that we had like used the money from the sale to do it. And we're like, no, actually we had done like a cash out refi like 3 months before. And if you remember that time period, 2020, 2021, like the banks were taking forever. And so closing on that refinance was like a 3-month process. It was ridiculous. And like the money closed like a week after we closed on the sale. And so it was like, we didn't really need to do it, but that happened. And we were like, whatever, let's just go ahead and do it. And so, I would say actually of all the things that we did, I left, I got laid off in January, which was, emotionally kind of weird, but ultimately a good situation for me, given my kind of, employment agreement and earn out and all that. It was, I'm like, fine and happy. Priscilla quit in May, mostly because she was just ready for a change of pace. And so I joked that they liked her more clearly because they kept her around for another 5 months. But we decided in January we were going to go take a 2-month trip with our family. And we talked to our financial advisor and I was like, I think I want to go. I've got this time. I've been forced to like stop. I'm going to stop, maybe do a few consulting gigs, but I'm going to chill out. Priscilla wants to kind of take a break before she goes on to the next thing. And we think we want to go like burn 30 or 40K on just like a summer long trip between like living expenses and like the trip. And our financial advisor stopped me mid sentence and he's like, do not call that burn. That is an investment in your family that I guarantee you in 15, 20 years when your kids are off at college and you don't see them anymore, you will be so happy that you spent. So he was like, take the L, the step backwards financially, however, small it'll feel in a few years. Who gives a shit? Burn 30 or 40K on that. You will not forget it. And like, I'm like fighting getting emotional about it because it was just that 2 months, that I can't put a price on. Cause I think a lot about what the 7 years of building that company was. And, the number of like 5 to 6 o'clock hour work sessions where I was hammering out some stupid email that drove no additional enterprise value to my company in the long run, that I wish I had been at home. But I was too self-important to think that I shouldn't keep working. I should go home. And, I know that now. And I've like built these really strong boundaries. And in fact, Priscilla and I, like, we kind of used pieces of EOS to design like a family corporate strategy.
Wow.
And, which I could talk a whole hour about, but we did that in December before I got laid off. And in January when that happened and we were like, all right, what next? We were like, flexibility and family first is like one of the pieces of this like framework. And so we were like, we're going, like, let's just do it. And so we did 15 national parks, 10,000 miles, 60 days. And we have a fifth wheel travel trailer that we've had for a few years. And we just lived on the road for 2 months. And, my colleagues at some of the companies I've been consulting were super flexible with me. And I would kind of work and do some emails and stuff in the afternoon, but we would get up at like 5 or 6 in the morning and we'd go hike Zion, the Grand Canyon, Yosemite. I mean, we had the most magical summer. And, the last day that we were in Colorado Springs before we started driving home, we were in, I forget the name of the national forest that's up there, but we were in the national forest outside of Pagosa Springs. And we packed up the trailer. My wife and I, like, the kids were in the truck was running, everything's ready to go. And we just like started crying. And it was like, wow, this was so worth it. And it was just such an emotional moment for us to like realize like this was what it was all about, And so we came home. I always do these like videos as a filmmaker early in my career. So I made this like 90-second, 110-second, like little vignette, like quick cut time to Claire de Lune. And the four of us in our family, we watch it, all of us, like instant tears. It's just like, I wish I could go back to that, And so I think of all the learnings, and the biggest thing that like came out of this experience was that like, it was what the hell are we working for? We finally got the answer. And the answer was like to build better boundaries around life and like in whatever format that needs to be. So you can prioritize the right things, and that's in companies, right? Like we have to prioritize what to work on and not. And more importantly for us, like personally. And so, we looked at our family as a quote unquote commodity of like days and weekends that we have with one another before we're all doing other things. And when we realized that we can keep making money, but we can't keep creating days with our kids, that became the priority. And that was, I think that was probably the best thing to come out of the business, out of everything. So
it's awesome. Awesome. I'm so glad you shared that. Really appreciate that. I think that's a good way to end. The, folks are going to want to reach out to you, learn a little bit about it, maybe just walk through very briefly what you're up to, because you're helping a few people articulate their story a little bit better, and maybe tell people how they can reach you if they want to connect.
Yeah, I've started kind of a loose set of engagements with a handful of CEOs who liked what I was doing before I sold, during, and after. And so now I've got a few practices that I use with companies to coach somewhere between like corporate strategy and like brand strategy on like how to build in public. And so, it touches on to some extent some of what you touched on today about, how, like, today more than ever, CEO is brand and brand is CEO. But how do you leverage that while also not making it a hindrance to the ability to exit and or like operate? So I've spent a bit of time, working in businesses with leaders on some of those practices. And in some instances, it's like, come in and help me figure out, like, get us unstuck. Like, how do we get out of this I'm in the middle of everything problem? And I can be very direct and helpful with leaders in that way. And then in other instances, it's like, we're running pretty well. We just need to figure out how to like actually take our content and storytelling ideas and turn them into scalable practices rather than just like, I had an idea for LinkedIn today. And so I've dog fooded, like some of my own kind of exercises that I learned, partially in supporting Amer and Cart.com and looked back at my career between my photography, design studio, Texas Humor, and Sauceda, and said, what are those things that I was using, and just put a system around them. And so I'm doing that right now. I don't think I'll do it forever, but for people and leaders that are trying to like learn that have reached out, I've been able to set up some small engagements that are kind of one time, two time, and then others that are more ongoing. But long term, I just really want to spend time really helping leaders get unstuck. Even as I go build other businesses, I think the pay it forward mindset that I benefited from a lot of people who've been there before is something that I want to certainly participate in. And so, if anything that I said today resonates with you, and at a minimum, you just want to have a online coffee, or you're in Austin and want to grab a ranch water, you can find me, just might spell my name out, JAYBSAUCEDA on Twitter, Instagram, or anywhere else. And you can track me down pretty easily.